Hello, and welcome to episode 8 of my podcast, Refining Rhetoric. I'm Robert Bortons, your host. Today's episode includes an interview with Dr. Carol Swain about the concept of Christian unity versus critical race theory. After that, I'll do a brief recap and unpack a few of the tools of learning from our interview. We'll do our third and final segment on the current event and talking about energy. And finally, Will McCurry will dive into part 2 of his series on NFTs, that's non-fungible tokens. Let's get started.
Classical Conversation Studios presents Refining Rhetoric with CEO Robert Bortons, a podcast where faith, business, politics, and classical education meet. Join us as we use the classical tools of rhetoric to seek truth in every arena of life.
So excited to have Dr. Carol Swain with us today. She's an award-winning political scientist and former tenured professor at Princeton and Vanderbilt University, is a distinguished senior fellow for the Constitutional Studies with the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and an educational advisor for the American Cornerstone Institute founded by Dr. Ben Carson. She has served on the Tennessee Advisory Committee for the U.S. Rights Commission, the National Endowment of Humanities, and the 1776 Commission. She's authored 11 books, including the bestseller Black Eye for America, How Critical Race Theory is Burning Down the House, co-authored by Christopher Schor. Her latest book is Countercultural Living, What Jesus Has to Say About Life, Marriage, Race, Gender, and Materialism. She's an expert on critical race theory, American politics, and race relations. She's been on ABC, BBC, TV, NPR, CNN, Fox and Friends, Judge Jeanine, Engel, and Tucker Carlson, just to name a few. And she's published opinion pieces in the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Epoch Times, the Financial Times, and USA Today. She's also an entrepreneur. She holds 5 degrees, including a PhD from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and an MSL from Yale. So that's a lot to say. Dr. Carol Swain, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Tell us a little bit about your journey and what led to where you are today.
Some people know my life story, some people don't. And often people will focus on the university degrees, but the most interesting part of my story is that I was one of 12 children born and raised in rural poverty in southwestern Virginia. I dropped out of school after completing the 8th grade. I married at 16, had my first child by 17, and by the time I was 20, I had 3 small children. People entered my life, they encouraged me, and so I got a high school equivalency, went to a community college, and got the first of 5 college and university degrees. I did not plan my journey in the sense that there was not a time in my childhood where I thought, hey, I want to be a professor, I want to be a teacher, I'm going to go out and get 5 degrees. No, I was just trying to survive.
Nice. And you've done more than that. Your latest book is called Countercultural Living, and I'm sure that your life has shown in that. So what is that book about, and why is it so important that you share it?
Well, last year was a productive year for me. In August, I published Black Eye for America, How Critical Race Theory is Burning Down the House. And I know that's a topic you're really interested in. And in September, I published Countercultural Living, What Jesus Has to Say About Life, Marriage, Race and Ethnicity, Gender Roles, and Materialism. And that's a very short book. Both of these books are a lot shorter than my normal books, like Be the People, A Call to Reclaim America's Faith and Promise. That's about 250 pages. The New White Nationalism was 550 pages. Abduction was maybe 200 and some pages. Well, A Countercultural Living is probably not more than 70 pages. And in it, I talk about what the Bible has to say, but I do it through the lens of my own life. And the book is organized in a way that each chapter is a question, and so the first, what does the Bible say about life? Then marriage, and then it's like a catechism because there's an answer to it, and then I go into the discussion. Each chapter ends with discussion questions, and What makes my book different, it's part of a 12-book series, is that I'm not a theologian. I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express once, but I'm not a theologian. But I am a person, that is deeply steeped, in the Bible since I became a devout believer more than 20 some years ago. So I know the Bible really well. And I've read a lot of books, but I'm also a person, that lived a life in the world. And so I can talk about countercultural living. And today in America, we're living in ancient Babylon in the sense that if you're a Christian and you're not living counter to the culture, then you're part of the problem. And there's a price to be paid today in America if you are a Bible-believing Christian who's trying to live by what the Bible has to say. And if you take question, what does God's word say about life? Well, life is sacred. He created all human beings in his image. And in the chapter on life, I talk about abortion. I talk about euthanasia, the research on human animal embryo fusions, as well as issues like that. And I try to be very real. I've had an abortion in my life, and some 40% of American women, 40+% of American women have had abortions, and many of them in the church. And so I share that with my audience because they need to know. And, if you had an abortion, God's love and his forgiveness covers all. The chapter on what does God have to say about marriage? Well, marriage is a sacred covenant. God performed the very first marriage in human history, and he brought that couple together. And God has advice in the Bible about how men and women are supposed to relate to each other. I've been married twice. I've not had a successful marriage, but I've never been married since I've been a Christian.
Well, I think that's what people appreciate you is you're so real and you share your life experiences because, the good thing is not many of those 12 disciples were theologians either. They were men of the marketplace and people with downfalls and life that hit them sideways sometimes. And Jesus picked them up and brought them into the limelight and chose them instead of the Pharisees or Sadducees to spread his gospel. So I don't think you need to be a theologian to give good biblical advice, especially when you say, what does the Bible really say about this? You mentioned a little bit about critical race theory, but we've been hearing that for a couple of years now, but that's really just one of many theories. So what is, critical theories in general, and what does that mean? And what are some examples of them?
Well, before I get to critical theory, I want to say that race, countercultural living talks about race. And God says from one man, he made every nation of men, and he chose where they should dwell. And if we actually went to the Bible, we could solve our race problem.
Yeah, we can solve a lot of problems. I always say, we're all related through Adam and Eve, but even more recently, we're all related through Noah, right?
You're right. And going back to critical theory, critical race theory is one of many different critical theories. They all have roots in Marxism, I would say postmodernism. And, postmodernism is where we got this idea that there were no objective truths, that everything is relative. That's where that came from. And the critical legal studies, all of that's part of the foundation of critical race theories. And critical theories themselves, they're rooted in conflict theory. And that's why they cannot ever bring about racial reconciliation and healing, because they're based on the Marxist conflict theory. And critical race theory in America is about dividing people. It divides whites and blacks, or whites and minorities, into oppressors and the oppressed. It argues that America is a systemically racist country that has racism in its DNA, and that only white people can be racist. So according to the critical race theory worldview, white people, they are asked to renounce, their whiteness. They are asked to become anti-racist when we all should be anti-racist. The racial and ethnic minorities are told that they are victims, that no matter how wealthy you are or where you come from, you are a victim because of your skin color. The theory is very destructive for our society. Again, it cannot bring people together. It's very harmful because it results in shaming and bullying of white children because they are white, and it accuses them of sins of their ancestors. And it's something that is very unsettling and runs counter to our civil rights laws and to our Constitution. And for racial and ethnic minorities, it creates despair and hopelessness, and it prevents people from doing the things that they could be doing to help themselves, because it's telling them that they're handicapped. You're going to be Black all your life. And during my era, we were interested, in the civil rights movement and equal opportunity and non-discrimination and color blindness. What CRT says is that there can be no color blindness. They're saying that they reject non-discrimination because they say it's not possible. They want discrimination in favor of racial and ethnic minorities. And they want equity instead of equal opportunity. And equity means equal outcomes. You show up and you fit into a certain box, and it doesn't have to be race. It could also be sexual orientation, or it could be, female versus male. They want standards, not meritocracy. They reject meritocracy. They want equal outcomes for people who fit into certain categories.
How's this, critical race theory differ from like the idea of, hey, you don't know someone until you walk a mile in their shoes, right? Because that's something, you always think about growing up, like, how would I respond in this person? So how are those two ideas different? Because what I always see, if you go back to Genesis, the devil said, did God really say? And most people are looking for a truth. The Bible says there is the truth. And of course, if there's a theory that says there are no truths, right, we should reject that as a Christian. But what's the difference really?
Well, the thing about, I think, true empathy, and they have something that they're teaching, in public and some private schools, social emotional learning, where they're trying to teach kids to be empathetic to a certain worldview. I think that with the critical race theory, they're telling, or they are not just telling racial and ethnic minorities, but everyone else, that as a marginalized minority or a person that's a member of a particular group, that my experiences and my worldview, that it trumps everything else. It trumps science, it trumps history, it trumps any kind of data that you might put forth, because my experiences and what I say have more moral authority than what you say. And it doesn't allow for you to have empathy, to sit down and wonder what it's like to be a Black middle-aged woman, a Black senior citizen woman. That doesn't count, because as a white person with CRT, you're not allowed to question anything. If I tell you that you are racist and that you're guilty for all the things that have taken place throughout history and current disparities, if you question that, that's evidence that you suffering from this white fragility, and that you don't know. You need to become woke. And by becoming woke, you become aware of everything that's taking place in the world and your own guilt and that type of thing. And it's a very dangerous situation that we have set up. We're not treating people as individuals, in God's image, people that can engage in a conversation as equals, can disagree with each other, can be persuaded by data and science and what you see with your eyes. All of that's being dismissed in favor of an indoctrinated view that is dangerous, and it's false. It's a lie. Critical race theory is a very racist worldview. Again, it's rooted in the Marxism, the postmodernism, and all kinds of university theories that should have stayed in the philosophy and political science and departments, the law schools. It should never be influencing our society as it is today at every level.
Mm-hmm. Now you have an organization, Unity Training Solutions LLC. So how do you approach, it's an alternative really to DEI training for companies, but how do you approach these questions that people may have in society?
Well, first of all, I think that we both would agree that diversity is a good thing, that God is a God of diversity, and you can look outside and Amen. You see a diverse universe, diverse plants, animals, fish, insects, and people. And so there's nothing wrong with diversity in and of itself, There's nothing wrong with a workplace that wants different kinds of people. There's nothing wrong with that. But the diversity that's being pushed by the political left is a very destructive kind of diversity that elevates some groups above others. And it is not the same meaning of diversity as the two of us would hold. Mm-hmm. And when we hear inclusion today, it's not talking about bringing in different kinds of people into the workplace, the learning environment. It's talking about you in your work environment, setting up a safe space for affinity groups where people that are consider themselves marginalized minorities can get together and complain and console one another. That's the new version of inclusion, and the new version of equal opportunity is equity. Again, equal outcomes, and what Unity Training Solutions does is that it embraces e pluribus unum, the American motto, out of many, one, unity. And we believe that organizations need effective teams, and that each individual has unique contributions. And when they come into a work environment, and you're hiring for this diversity, yes, you have different people, they have different talents, but one is not superior to the other. One may have a different talent than the other, but they're all equal. And so the training that I offer through Unity Training Solutions is consistent with our civil rights laws. The 1964 Civil Rights Act and its 1972 amendments banned discrimination, in workplaces and in schools. It banned racial discrimination, discrimination on the basis of national origin, color, religion, and sex. And that includes, disabilities and some other things. But that is the law of the land. DEI is not the law of the land. Non-discrimination is the law of the land. Equal accommodations is the law of the land. And so what we're trying to do at Unity Training Solutions is to help companies by providing them the historical background about civil rights laws and maybe sexual harassment laws, but the law of the land and where it came from, and the history of America's race relations, just like we did with the 1776 Project, is a very positive history of people working together across racial and ethnic lines, whites and blacks working together. The civil rights movement happened because we worked together. We reached a consensus about how individuals ought to be treated. We have abandoned that. And so at Unity Training Solutions, we're trying to get back to helping organizations stay on mission, helping them accomplish what they're good at.
When, so the CRT and critical theories seem to be new to a lot of people now, but was that something that like Martin Luther King Jr. and during that time frame that they were debating, like, is this the right way to go versus, equality and based on character and those ideas?
Two things were taking place. In the 1960s, you had Marxism on the college campuses, and they were very much trying to figure out how they were going to redo society. But with Dr. Martin Luther King, he was very much focused on judging people by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin. He would be appalled by critical race theory and DEI as it is being practiced today, because it's just totally antithetical to everything he stood for. And again, it runs counter to our Constitution as well as our civil rights laws. And the organizations that have jumped on that bandwagon, I think many of them are going to experience some very successful lawsuits that are going to be costly because they are violating the law of the land.
Mm-hmm. What, how do you see the critical theories impacting education? We know that how it's impacting businesses with this big push on, hey, we're not going to, like Larry Flink at BlackRock, we're not going to invest in your company unless you are promoting these Marxist ideas in your culture. How's that affecting not just public schools, but even private schools and maybe even sneaking into the homeschooling as well?
Well, I hope it's not sneaking into homeschooling, but now a lot of parents are homeschooling. I'm not going to say everyone's getting into the act, but It's like one of the fastest growing movements in America, and more Black parents and Hispanic parents are homeschooling.
Yep.
Well, what is happening with the CRT, it is in the curriculum through books, through teaching materials, and through videos. And when you get into a debate with many progressives, they say, no, CRT is a course in a law school. It's a course. No, it's a worldview, a very dangerous worldview. And it's been disseminated down through K through 12 educational realm. And it is definitely in private Christian schools, the ones where you don't think it would be. It's in Christian colleges and universities, as well as public and private schools. And I'm not surprised that there would be progressives that would get into the movement, maybe developing curriculum for homeschoolers, because there may be some progressive parents pull their children out of school because for safety reasons, but they don't have a problem with what they think is a progressive agenda on race. I think there's a lot of ignorance behind the embrace of CRT because people don't understand what it is. It's not about reconciliation and race. And the critical theory, also, some of the ones that are most dangerous as well, is the critical queer theory. The LGBT movement, they're very much, that is a critical theory that has gotten into the kindergarten curriculum. In fact, it's even below that, KinderCare, the largest daycare provider in America, now has a LGBTQ curriculum for 4-year-olds. And so, I mean, these dangerous things are happening. And in the public schools, you have teachers now that get on TikTok and get on social media and brag about what they're doing in their classrooms to indoctrinate your children. The public schools have become dangerous places, but parents just have to be vigilant. They have to be alert. And so whether they're homeschooling, they have to look very carefully at that curriculum. If they're in public schools, paying a lot of money because it's a Christian school, they have to be ever vigilant.
Yeah, that's great. In Christianity, we believe in a thing called forgiveness. Is there forgiveness available in CRT?
Well, not in CRT, but for true Christians, the ones, we sit next to in the pews, they should not be following the world with this race agenda. And I have found, much to my dismay, that a critical theory has reached into the church through social justice, and a lot of pastors who maybe they mean well, but they don't understand what they're dealing with, but they have embraced, instead of teaching about forgiveness and us being, one in Christ, many of them are on this bandwagon about guilt. And I'm a Southern Baptist. I have lost track of how many times they have apologized for being on the wrong side of the race issue. By now, they should have received the forgiveness that Jesus offers them. So they were, God forgave them back when they apologized the first time, but they're still apologizing. And some of the Black members of the denomination, it's very lucrative to be the victim. And so they're not offering the real forgiveness. And so there's no incentive. There's a monetary incentive to keep racial divisions alive. If you truly forgave the past, then it would not be nearly as lucrative for the people who benefit from it.
Yeah, I know, growing up, we learned about slavery and the atrociousness of that. I've got family that immigrated here after World War II and had been displaced from Latvia, and were in not concentration camps, but displaced person camps in Russia and in Germany. So not the two places that you wanted to be in. And then on the other side of the family, we had people that came over on the pilgrimage. So you never know what people's background is from. And to judge someone solely based on their skin color seems to be superficial at best. So what Christian parents and maybe Christians in general might get confused by these ideas, because maybe there's been a void in how to talk about these things. So what is your advice for a mom or dad or a Christian who wants to talk about some of these things that really did happen? What are some good tools or tips on how to approach those?
First of all, You have to make sure, again, that you understand what CRT is and why there may be books on civil rights that are part of CRT. And there's a book that I'm aware of called The Youngest Marcher. And it's about a 9-year-old girl that took part in a civil rights march. And when they threw everyone in jail, that she was put in, with the crowd. But it presents all white people as being evil, when we know that the true story of civil rights is a story of whites and blacks working together. We would not have had a successful civil rights movement without white people. And so no parent should fear talking about history, but there's so much positive parts of American history. Even during slavery, you had abolitionists, you had the Underground Railroad. It was white philanthropists that gave the money that set up black schools and colleges and universities. They were all set up by white dollars. And so the true story of America is whites and blacks working together and working across religious lines as well as racial lines to make a better society. And so parents shouldn't be shy about it. My book, Black Eye for America, How Critical Race Theory is Burning Down the House, is important because it was written for parents. It's not a long book. It was written to explain what CRT is, where it came from, how it manifests itself in our society, why it's anti-Christian, why it's anti-civil rights, why it's anti-constitution. Has 2 chapters on how to fight back, has a glossary, as well as appendices with resources, and each chapter ends with study questions. And I would recommend that to anyone who wants to learn more about CRT, because it was written in response to people who were grappling with those issues, who were contacting me. And then the Countercultural Living book that we started off with is an easy read. It also addresses these issues that we're dealing with today in our society.
Where's the best place for our listeners to go find those books?
Well, they're on Amazon. They can be ordered from any major bookstore. But through my website, there's a Christian bookstore called Logos in Nashville. And Logos books, if the person that places the order wants me to sign or personalize the book, I go in periodically and I personalize a batch of books so that they can get their book personalized. And so I would recommend Logos books if you are someone that doesn't want to give your money to Amazon.
Yeah, always trying to figure out ways to stop doing that. Sometimes I think, that they're going to contact me if my wife and I stop ordering from them for more than a couple of days. But yeah, we definitely encouraging people to go to your website, carolswain.com. And of course, we'll put it in the show notes, and you can, click the link through there to order her books. What would be one last piece of advice for a homeschooling mom who, their son or daughter comes home and starts saying things that don't seem quite right about race and the history in the United States? What's one last piece of advice you'd give them?
What I can tell you about the homeschooling parents is that it's important for them to educate their children about what's happening in the world and the different worldviews, because if they don't, the other relatives and other children they meet will. And so they have to have the conversations with their children. And they shouldn't be afraid of conversations about sex, about the LGBT issues, because they're going to come up. And so that's part of what my response would be. And then I deal some with this in Abduction, how liberalism steals our children's hearts and minds. And the website, carolmswain.com, is one website, but bethepeoplenews.com is where most of my resources, my videos, my articles are. And so we do have resources, and no one has to feel like they are walking through this alone, that there's so many support groups. And so don't be intimidated. And I applaud all the homeschooling moms and dads, because you're doing something for our nation. At the end of the day, your children will be among the few critical thinkers, because if you do a good job, those kids that are educated in classical educational systems and in home schools are going to be the ones who are not indoctrinated, but who are truly, truly educated.
That's great. Yeah, Classical Conversations, we want to help critical thinkers, not critical theory. Well, Dr. Carol Swain, thank you so much for coming on the show today. That you can go to your website to find out more information. I know that you're on all sorts of TV shows, and they can go hear directly from you at bethepeoplenews.com. So thank you for coming.
Thank you so much. And I also speak at homeschooling conferences, so I will run into some of the parents.
Awesome. All right, hopefully we'll see you there. Hey everybody, just wanted to interrupt this podcast to let you know about our Odyssey program. If your Classical Conversations Challenge student is considering taking a gap year after graduation, be sure to apply for the Odyssey program through CC+. The Odyssey program is designed to improve your students' personal, academic, and spiritual development, all within a community of peers and mentors. They have the opportunity to travel, receive up to 30 college credit hours, and discover who they are in Christ. To apply to the Odyssey program, visit classicalconversationsplus.com/Odyssey. That's classicalconversationsplus.com/Odyssey. All right, that was a fun conversation today. And as always, we're going to practice our 15 tools of learning and call out a couple of them that we saw in today's episode. And we always pick one from each of the areas. And the first one stage is grammar. And so the 5 core habits of grammar: the repetition that builds knowledge, naming. Defining terms is always important because critical race theory and its origins are often misunderstood. I thought it was crucial for us to begin by naming it and clarifying what it is and where it came from. Next, in the 5 common topics of dialectic, the questions that develop understanding: comparison. And in our interview, Dr. Swain compared and contrasted critical race theory to the views and work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and other civil rights activists. She also explained why equity is not the same as equality and what those differences are. And in the 5 canons of rhetoric, talk about the tool of delivery. And that's really about presenting your thoughts the best way. And, Carol really opened up to us and told us about her background, which was very compelling. I loved hearing her testimony and the way that God redeemed her past and allowed her not to be a victim of her circumstance. That was so inspiring. So those are our 3 tools of the 15 that we're practicing today, 1 in each category. And next, we'll do the same thing with current events. And we are in part 3 of our series on energy, which has been in the news a lot lately. And we need to think about it from a classical perspective. So let's jump in. And we talked about the sources and the definition and the laws of energy in the first episode. And in the second episode, we talked about what sources of energy do we use as consumers? How do those different energies maybe affect how we can use them? And practice the tools of learning with that conversation. So in this third episode on energy, we're going to talk a little bit more about the nitty gritty. And that is, what is an energy grid? And so that's going to be a naming the 5 core habits. What is an energy grid? How does it work? How are they designed? If you've ever traveled overseas, you know that their energy grids do not look anything like ours. So it's really important to understand how energy grids work, especially because we were talking about gasoline, we're talking about green energy to our homes, and those type of things. One of the things that we would also talk about is attending. Do energy grids carry all types of energy the same way? So once we define the grid, how does that work? Do they need a steady source of energy coming in, or can it handle, waves of energy, and how does that distribute them out? Next, we would talk about the 5 common topics of dialectic and relationship. How costly is energy storage? If energy grids act differently depending on the source of the energy, do we need energy storage? And is that cost effective? Is it safe? How far away do you need energy storage from the place that creates energy? How close do you need it to be to the place that consumes the energy? We also need to talk about relationship. Could the current infrastructure handle new forms of energy and of energy consumption, right? So if we change the forms of energy that go into the system, can the grid handle that? And the same token, if the use of the energy off the grid changes because of behavior change or because of laws or different regulations, Can the current infrastructure handle those new forms of energy? We might look at different states. We are in the United States of America. We are a federation of states. We are a republic. And so while we have a federal government that probably controls a lot of rules and regulations, state governments have the ability to make their own rules and regulations as well, which is a good thing because we can compare and contrast what different state rules and laws are and what they have. So we might say, what are some states that have progressive electricity or energy policies? And then we might want to say, what are their prices? How do those prices compare to other states that have more conservation or conservative energy or electricity policy? You might say, hey, what states have the most black or brownouts? Do they have a stable energy consumption and infrastructure? And look at which ones maybe do it poorly and which ones do it well. You could also look at pollution for those different states as well. So a funny joke I heard the other day is, what did the socialists use before candlelight? Electricity. So it's very important that we understand energy policy. And to be able to understand energy policy, we need to understand where energy comes from, how it's consumed. So to enter the conversation as classicalists, we need to be able to ask good questions. And by practicing the 15 tools of learning together, we can enter into any conversation that is around us and is relevant to our culture and to society. Next up, we will have our Classical Crypto with Will.
Hello, and welcome to Classical Crypto with Will. Today is the second half of the beginner's NFT conversation. Last episode, we laid the foundation for NFTs. If you're listening today and you're slightly lost, I would recommend going back and listening to part 1. Interesting times, right? NFTs frequent the news outlets on a daily basis right now. Justin Bieber buys Bored Ape for $1.3 million. Kevin O'Leary releases NFT validation for physical product sales. High-end seafood restaurants releasing NFT memberships. There's even an NFT project coming out that gives you access to a private island. Boy, that NFT is going to be pricey. Now, I've been in crypto for years, but it was only 5 months ago that I finally decided to buy my first NFT and deep dive into a better understanding of NFT's potential. Now, you've likely heard it. If you're like me, you said it. How could a silly JPEG be selling for tens, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of dollars? Now, 99.9% of people might say that because they don't understand that the JPEG file or the art aspect of an NFT is only the cover. It's the technology behind or beneath the JPEG image that produces the immense value. In other words, does the paint job on an expensive car give it value? Of course not. I can take the same paint color and paint a 90s beater. What gives a sports car its value is the V8 engine, the mechanics, the horsepower. It's the utility of the car that makes it valuable. It's the exact same thing with NFTs. Everyone fixates on the art, but the art is a wrapper that covers a cryptographic smart contract. Remember, it's if-then code that can be programmed to do anything. NFTs can be used as receipts, validation, memberships, discount codes, etc. There are so many benefits. NFT validation is already bringing some integrity and accountability to the internet. What do I mean by that? There's nothing stopping folks at this moment from taking a screenshot of digital art and claiming ownership of that art. Additionally, large platforms allow users to post or upload whatever they want with no accountability, no checks, no balances. An example of this would be LinkedIn. When I graduated college with a business degree, I posted that degree on LinkedIn, and I also posted some of my certificates. I got several job offers that day, so that is a system that works well. But I've heard of a lot of people falsifying their degrees to get job offers when really, in fact, they didn't have the credentials to begin with. Soon, I believe NFT technology will grow to a place where credentials are linked to a blockchain. Already, Twitter is exploring a Connect Wallet feature where you can connect your NFT to the platform and individuals display accurate credentials based upon verified performance and completion. Now, we're in the early stages, but many entrepreneurs, institutions, and tech companies are starting to see the writing on the wall. Digital artists will finally have a marketplace where their art can be appreciated, trusted, and owned with integrity. Instead of flaky QR codes, companies can release member discount cards that bring their communities closer together and track transactions on a verifiable blockchain. Overseas sweatshops could start going out of business when users are able to validate their purchases by trusted companies they choose. Kevin O'Leary, Raul Paul, Tom Brady, Gary Vaynerchuk, Kathy Wood, the NFL, OpenSea, Coinbase, Instagram, Twitter, Adidas, just to name a few. These are the high-end profiles and the multi-billion-dollar companies that are already moving forward with this technology. Gary Vaynerchuk has gone as far as to say that NFT technology is the biggest innovation since the printing press. Just as Gutenberg revolutionized the world with movable type, NFT technology could organize, validate, and bring order to a somewhat chaotic internet space. It will be very interesting to see how this plays out over the next few years. Thanks for listening to Classical Crypto today. I'm your host, Will McCreary. We'll see you next time.
I loved hearing Carol's story today, and it's just a great reminder that when you see someone on TV or read about them, you don't know their whole story, you don't know their background. A lot of times we just assume that they've always been famous, and I just loved how Carol opened up to us and just told us about her humble beginnings and the way that God redeemed her. And if that's something that you enjoyed too, please share this episode. Of course, we practiced the 15 tools of learning together, as well as learned a little bit more about NFTs, which is a fun and exciting topic. If you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to share it. And we would love if you would make us a regular part, and if you would follow us on your favorite podcast app. And just appreciate you spending some time with us today. God bless and have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Refining Rhetoric with Robert Bortons. Want more? Make sure to subscribe so you won't miss an episode. You can also follow us on social media to continue the conversation, and visit classicalconversations.com/rhetoric to find out how you can join a local homeschool community.